Terrorism, as we know today, can place its origins, in terms of defining and recognizing it, in the later days of the French Revolution. After the execution of King Louis XVI, the nation of France was under threat, both internally from rebellion and in turn externally from foreign invasion. In 1792, the National Assembly declared the state La Patrie en danger, excuse my accent, which means the fatherland in danger. Soon after, it declared terror the order of the day. This adoption of terror is what first introduced the term terrorist into politics. To some, the adoption of terror transformed the revolution into a destructive force instead of a liberating force for change. Charles Townshend is the author of Terrorism, one of Oxford's A Very Short Introduction series. He writes that, quote, "At the same time as the change in viewpoints about the revolution's tactics, the rebels' rationalism itself drove them to rework the justification of political violence." In other words, they needed motive to commit these killings, these acts of violence. They needed a goal. This motive is the key to the nature of modern terrorism as we know it. By utilizing terror, from this perspective, it became a vehicle for political and social change. When a people feel that civil pursuits of change, like protest or civil disobedience, no longer are effective, they may turn to violent rebellion or even revolution. These violent acts may be considered terrorism. However, to the people seeking a true change, it could simply be revolution. And for what it's worth, Townshend points out that the use of terror is not exclusive to rebel groups or revolutionaries. Terror can be state-run as well. Examples of this can include the Ulster Loyalist paramilitaries during the height of the IRA, or, as many believe, by US-backed guerrilla forces in Afghanistan. Sometimes terrorism is, or at least appears to be, the only viable solution to bring about the change that a society deems necessary. For example, Townshend brings up the actions of Carlos Marighella, a Brazilian communist leader. Marighella encouraged citizens to stand and fight back against the government's oppression. In his mini-manual of the urban guerrilla, he writes that, quote, "Anyone who opposes the military dictatorship and wants to fight against it can do something, however little." He says in another essay that, quote, "Terrorism alone will not win us power, but could demoralize the authorities." Marighella's motive here was to wear down the military and with it its authority. This was, at least to him and his followers, a violent revolution against a dictatorship that was oppressing his people. He also made it clear that his revolution, so to speak, was not in any form against the common people. He wrote that the terrorist acts were, quote, "not designed to kill members of the common people or to upset or intimidate them in any way." In conclusion, there's always a reason, a motive behind the use of terror. This motive, or goal, has, at least in theory, given terrorism power as a political and social tool. However, terrorism is not a major threat to a state's security, given that the state is stable. As Townshend writes, quote, "We may conclude that Western revolutionary terrorist groups have relied on pure terrorism mainly as a result of political weakness, and so the threat they posed is minimal." Most would argue that terrorism, even as a last-ditch effort, is not justifiable. On the other hand, though, to many who have been forced into a hopeless situation, terror is the only way they know how to get out.